Hi, let me first thank you for joining us on this video series. My name is Dr. Monica Hill. I'm so very excited about this video series. It's one that I've worked on for a while. It's one that I've thought was extremely important for a while. I am a relational psychologist. My practice is in Fayetteville, Georgia. And one of the things my husband and I own the practice together, and we've been in practice for 17 years. And for those years, we have been mostly focused on relationships. We take individuals, we have a lot of individual clients, and those individuals come in sometimes working through some of the issues that they're working on in their relationships. So we see individual clients working on relationship issues. We see couples working on relationship issues. We see families, we see entire families, moms, dads, parents. We see individual adolescents as they're growing through their adolescent years, working through what they need to do when it comes to peer relationships at school. So we are just, a whole practice is around relationships, and it's been that way since we started our practice 17 years ago. And we're excited about that. So I decided about maybe 6 months ago to do these video series because I think that through the years that I've worked with clients on relationships, that I have found that there are certain core principles that make relationships work better. So this is not me to say that we are not getting it right. It's just that I think that we could do better at what we are doing in relationships, becoming more healthy individuals, therefore hopefully becoming more healthy relationships. I think it is what we owe to ourselves. It's what we owe to those who are in relationship with us. I think it's what we owe to our communities and our country as a whole, to become better at these relationships, because I think it just transcends through everything that we can think of and do in our lives. So you're joining us. This is the actual very first session. And so as I start this first session, I want to lay down not only the ABCs of relationships, I want to lay down a couple of even primary concepts even before that I'm going to actually talk about, called the 1, 2, 3s of relationships. So when the session begins, as I kind of walk through these slides, I'm going to do an overview of what I think are how relationships are developed, and I'm going to call those the 1, 2, 3s, which are the foundation. Then I'm going to go into the video session on temptation, transparency, and trust. There will be a series of these videos that will lay out many concepts that I think are foundational for relationships, but I actually picked this one to start. And when I start walking through that, I'll kind of give you a little bit more insight as to why I started with this particular one. After I finish the training, I want to make sure that everybody understands that there are no perfect relationships. There's no relationship that out there. There are some good ones and there's some extremely healthy ones, but there is no perfect relationship. And most of us are on a relationship development journey. So as each of the series, what I will do is be transparent and talk about that particular subject as it relates to my and Maurice's life, kind of how we have gotten through some of the things that we're teaching and telling you about, which actually makes it so much more relevant for me that I've lived through almost everything that I will teach and train through this video series. Towards the end of the video, I will actually give you a chance to kind of connect with us. The way this will work is I will put a video series out there once a month. I'll leave it out there for a couple of weeks. Then I will open it up for registration. Actually, the registration will start as soon as the video is posted for people to register for the online live WebEx discussion that we'll have around this thing. If you haven't, there's an introduction to Hill and Associates video out there that I talk a little bit more about my practice as a whole, all the things that we do. This actually is the launch of our online practice and what we're doing to actually reach a broader audience, to kind of get more connected with people that may or may not be able to come into our office that's local here in Fayetteville, Georgia. So there will be a real you follow-up registration process so that you can register, so you can kind of join in with us either live here in Fayetteville or online, so that we can continue to talk and do a deeper dive into this subject. All right, so the whole focus of this series is to talk about healthy relationships, or how we can get into a process of making our relationships more healthy than they are, because most of us have a foundation and a base. And the series is not just about dating or marriage relationships, it's about all relationships. And I'm going to talk about that because there's so many relationships that we deal with as an individual that it's probably no one on the planet that doesn't deal with some kind of relationship in some way. So what I want to do first is I want to do a kind of a reality check. I want to start with just kind of checking in and making sure that everybody understands that development is normal and expected for relationships. There is no way that you could begin any relationship and not develop that relationship, and that's normal. There's so much about counseling and therapy and group discussions and group topics that is kind of taboo with people. They believe that if I have to go and talk about my relationship or discuss it, that something's wrong with it or something's wrong with me. So one of the things I want to lay down initially out of the gate, that if you're listening to these series and if you're joining into these groups, by all means, just know that you're in the right place, doing the right thing. There is your physical body there's nothing about us that doesn't need a checkup or an evaluation at some point in time. So most of this will be just teaching, training, and evaluations. There absolutely will be services available for you if you need a deeper dive into a specific issue or a specific relationship. But I want people to embrace that relationship development is normal. It's what we should do. There's nothing taboo about it. The other thing is I want people to realize that there's a scale of health. If you can think about a child when he's going through its developmental stages, there is a scale that each child is put on at a certain age to see if they're inside the scale, to say that they're normal, and if they're over the scale, they're kind of off the chart, or if they're below it, they're below the chart. So what we want to do is to create a range of healthy relationships, and none of those relationships will look the same. But what we want to do is to pull anything that's unhealthy about our relationships inside the healthy range. And again, you may see some people on this end of healthy and this end of healthy, but they're all healthy just the same. So there is no one situation or one scope that will fit everybody, but there is a range that I hope that this video series will actually get us to be able to kind of step inside that healthy range. And I want us to embrace the relational treatment, adjustment, and growth process that it takes. As a parent, you start off as a parent with your first child, and you've got to grow into how to be a parent with those relationships, and those little people that you're trying to raise are in relationship with you. And by no stretch of the imagination should we ever feel that we know it and we don't have to grow. I've got it down. I've had 3 kids. I've had 2 kids. I've been a kid, that I don't have to grow, because with every child, we have to grow to be able to deal with that child and to grow with that child. With every sibling, we have to grow. I come from a fairly large family, and with each one of my siblings, as I engage with them, there's a growth opportunity with me, with each one of them, as we engage in our relationship with my family. And I have 3 kids. None of my kids are the same. They all have very distinct personalities. And I just wanted everybody to truly, truly understand and embrace that relational treatment, adjustment, and growth is just a part of life. It's a part of what we have to do. So the fact that you're here, the fact that you're signed up and wanting to grow in your relationships, I give you 2 thumbs up, and hope we enjoy the journey together. The journey is progressive. The developmental cycles there's some things you come into relationships naturally or innately knowing. You don't, once you get married, there's certain things, dynamics that you naturally know, certain things you don't have to be taught. So most of us come into parenting with a decent foundation that is innate, that is natural, that is instinctive to us, so the very first platform of progression is that there are some things that are innate, but we don't want you to stop there, because there's so much more to get and to grow and to enhance yourself as a person and the relationships around you. So the way we progress through our developmental cycles is we absolutely hone in on what we're told. So many times in our relationship development, we're told how to do it. We're told how to parent. We're told how to date. We're told how to treat our coworkers. We're told, how to treat our siblings. So a lot of our development is actually kind of spoon-fed to us or given to us by what we're told. One of the things we'll talk about later is to make sure you guard that spoon and know that you're being told the right things by the right people as you go through those relationships and the relationship development. And again, another cycle of what we learn is by what we're told, by what we observe. Many of us, for our families and from a marriage relationship, the very first one that we saw was our parents, or maybe our uncle or an aunt or family member, grandparents, is we observed and we didn't really get told anything. We just kind of watched how they did it. That is one of the primary ways kids learn when they're younger, is through observations. They don't learn primarily when they're very young through what they're told. The very first learning phase for all of us is by what we observe. So we've got what's naturally innate to us, we've got what's being told to us, it's got what we observe, and then another cycle of development is what we're able to experience. A lot of us as parents want to be able to tell our kids something, just do what I tell you, just do what I tell you. But if your kids are like mine, there are certain things that they will not get, they won't learn it until they're able to experience it. And hopefully I've given them a window of things that hopefully you get because I tell you. I'm willing to allow you to experience, and hopefully we're giving, my husband and I are giving them some good things to observe so that their whole developmental cycle and process is good. The last one, number 5, is one that I really don't think that we have tapped into very well, is the training and talking about it dynamic around relationships. That's why my heart has been yearning for the last probably 10 to 11 months to get this video series out here online so that we can begin to dive deep into this training and talking about it portion of our developmental cycle, because I think if any of them are kind of a little bit immature, it is probably by training and talking about it in healthy forms, in forms in where we can get benefit out of it. Because a lot of us are talking about our relationships, but it's not in a form in where those relationships can be developed to a healthier place. So hopefully this forum will be that for many of you, and that we can have a good time taking this journey together. Another one of the aspects of the 1, 2, 3 is just the basic foundations, is that the process is within relationship. There's a process that I really, really hold near and dear to called feedback. There is feedback that you will get inside yourself. You will give yourself feedback. Your gut will tell you something. Your instincts will tell you something. So you will get internal feedback and internal dialogue all the time. Hopefully, if you've allowed yourself to be around good input, then that internal dialogue is something that you can kind of go with and lean into, your intuition and your gut. The other thing that's very key to relationships is the feedback that you will get from external sources. It could be the spouse that you're married to. It could be the person that you're dating. It could be the sibling that you're related to. It could be the parent that you have, or, unbeknownst to parents, it could be the child that you're raising could give you feedback. That feedback loop is tremendous, because even though we're doing the best thing that we can to be parents, that feedback loop to how well we're doing and if we're doing it right is tremendous. So all external feedback loops, and again, not all of them are healthy. So we have to make sure that we understand that what's good, healthy feedback and what's damaging, negative feedback. But most of us don't like to get feedback because it moves us, it shakes us, it grows us. So we like to give it, but we don't always like to receive it. So part of this will be getting us into a place and understanding where we can understand different perspectives and grow from those perspectives that may be different than our own. And in the areas of growth, there is 3 areas I think that are significant in that we grow. We obviously know we grow in our physical bodies as we get older in age, especially when we're adolescents growing up through those very developmental physical growth stages. But we also grow psychologically, which means how we think. Our perspectives are made up of 2 basic dynamics. It's based on our knowledge and our experience, and that's how we think. That's how we get our perspectives, is based on those 2 dynamics. And one of the things that I enjoy doing, and I've just seen such a tremendous intake or uptake from people when they come to counseling and they're doing this psychological sharing of perspectives, one that is not necessarily their own, but one that they can embrace because it hits and it holds and it's understanding and it's logical and it makes sense and it's just some perspective that they may not have had. So one of the probably greatest values that I get out of being a therapist is in this area of psychological growth, where people are able to listen to each other and listen to me as I kind of counsel and teach, and their perspectives grow psychologically. So it's probably the one area that I would think maybe is the most untapped, is that because we believe I think like I think, and it's my thoughts, and it's just the way I think, and we haven't lent ourselves to much development and growth in the area of our psychology and the mind, the way that we think. So that'll be something that'll be interesting for all of us to get into. The other growth area is our spiritual growth area, is that if you have a faith base and you have a level of spiritual maturity, relationships will call on that base and cause you to grow it like you can only imagine, especially if you have children, especially if you're married, if you're dating, if you work in a dynamic world of other people, if you have a spouse or an ex-spouse, if you have in-laws, if you have siblings. This area of spiritual maturity is probably another one. It's not about going to church. It's not about, reading whatever your faith base is. It's not that. It's about taking that and the application of that inside those relationships. So it's the applied belief and the applied learning that you have. And sometimes that's hard. It's easy to believe, but it's hard to do. And doing it is the growth area and where we're going to focus in these relationships. You've got to do what you believe. And the other piece of growth is relational. As an individual, I was, grown and mature when I married Maurice. He was grown and mature when he married me. But what we recognize is I had never been married before, and I had never had to be this relational 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the rest of my life. I've got to grow and be relational. The good thing about being married, though, in this relationship, if you just kind of get it and you work at it hard, it gets easier. It gets much, much easier. The development and growth relationally gets a lot easier. Maurice and I have been married 22 years, and I can't tell you a year that I have not grown relationally with him. But the growth that I do with him has gotten easier year over year. It is still constant. We still grow, but it is much easier than it was in the initial formative years of our marriage. Healthy relationships, I believe, have a certain framework. The framework for those healthy relationships is built upon skills. Most of us are okay with getting skills from our job. We got skills to learn how to drive. We learn how to drive in the parking lot, and then we learn how to drive on the street, and then we learn how to drive on the expressway. So we're used to developing our skills to a higher and higher level, except for in relationships. One of the key skills that I work on with people in relationships is how to communicate. Most of us know how to talk. Some of us do, but very few of us know how to listen. And I remember very well when I learned how to listen. I was an absolute married adult, and I realized I didn't know how to listen. I knew how to listen just deep enough to get what I needed to say, what else I needed to say so I can talk some more. But I didn't know how to listen for that other person's position and their perspectives, and kind of lean in and understand and try to get it and try to really get what I'm doing in this listening space. Once I got out of this listening space, now I can go back into the talking space, but people don't stay in the listening space enough. Again, communications is just one of the skills that I think is kind of a 1, 2, 3 of relationships. The other one is teaching and training. And again, I'm so glad that you're here joining me with this video training series. Is just kind of an evidence of that, the fact that you're ready to start this journey for teaching and understanding and training when it comes to relationships, because I do believe it's a teachable, trainable, workable a solution to make us healthier. Just like you would go to the gym, some people have naturally physical fit bodies and some of us don't. But with training and teaching what to do and how to do it, I think a lot of us could get to that healthy place, as well as some people who have those naturally fit bodies. One thing that I've kind of framed up is that I see group conversations, what we're going to do when we go live online with the WebEx and with the sessions here, is we're going to do it in group. There's so much more that you could learn in group conversations, and I consider those to be the over-the-counter drug. to the degree that most of us have had to take some kind of over-the-counter medication in our lives, over-the-counter, not necessarily a prescription. So the group discussions are going to be to get what is a little bit kind of unhealthy to healthy. It's the over-the-counter prescription, the over-the-counter medication that I hope that we will be able to do in these group discussions. And I've been in groups before, I've led groups before. They have some of the most dynamic principles in the groups if it's conducted well, if it's conducted right, that you can ever believe. If you've never been in a group, a developmental group or a learning training group over time, then I think you'll enjoy the way this will be laid out for you and the fact that you'll just be able to grow through this group conversations. You get a place to ask your questions as well as learning from everyone else who's asking their questions and the engagement that they will have with me and with each other. The next level of a framework for this is, I think, is personal counsel. Again, me being a licensed therapist, I believe in it. I think it's part of one of the things that all of us should do at some point, because group over-the-counter medications don't get us all of what we need. And I think sometimes we need a prescription written specifically for us with a higher strength. Somebody may go get counsel and get this, but I need one that's a 500 milligram of counsel. I need to go every week until I get it right. Somebody could go one time and get a 100 milligram and they're fine. And I lay personal counsel out as a prescription because it is something that I think is more targeted. It is more specific for you. So as we go through these group conversations for these over-the-counter kind of learnings and trainings, if you feel like you need something more specific or something stronger or a higher milligram, by all means, I recommend getting personal counsel. Sometimes you get personal counsel for you, and sometimes you get personal counsel for the relationship. I have several client families. I have quite a few counseling families where the prescription is being written for the entire family so that everybody can get healthy at the same time, so that no unhealthy person infects the healthy person once they have come to maybe get their individual counsel, which is a dynamic that I've seen very well when families are willing to do it. And there are many times within those families that there are multiple treatment plans. Somebody gets this medication, somebody gets that medication, somebody's got this issue, somebody's got that issue. And it's one of the most beautiful things for me as a therapist when I see everybody fully engaged for the health of the family, for the health of the relationship. And this could be a family, whether it's mom and dad and kids, this could be the siblings, the grandparents, the in-laws. I've actually been blessed enough to see all kinds of family treatment therapy programs throughout my practice. And it's a great thing when everybody's taking their medicine, their prescriptions and their counsel and their health, and everybody's getting healthy at the same time. It's an amazingly beautiful thing. So if you haven't done that, maybe that's something you would consider doing. One of the other goals is in counseling is, as we set goals, I want to make sure that this is one of the primary goals that we set, that we start avoiding relationships ending up in the emergency room or the ICU or actually dying. I think we are better than that as an individual. I think we're better than that as a family. I think we're better than that as a nation. That the number of marriages and sibling relationships and in-law relationships that end up in the emergency room, and what I mean by that is that they are so toxic that it's literally a person can't function in life because of this toxic relationship that they have, and that the person's life is really kind of impacted by this negative relationship and what's happening there. And again, it happens at all levels. It happens with siblings. It happens with spouses. I've seen it happening with people who date each other. I've seen it happen with husbands and wives, of course, that it gets so toxic that they're in ICU, and either as a relationship or as an individual, you get so disturbed that your physical system begins to be impacted by this toxicity in this relationship. And I just don't think we have to live like that. I think we're better than that. I think with training and education and over-the-counter prescriptions and group counseling and writing the correct prescriptions, I think we can really get to a healthy place in our relationships. One of the things hopefully this video series will do is to train you about improving your personal awareness about that it's available, that training and education is available. With me doing this online series, I'm hoping that more people around the world or country will be able to join me that necessarily would not be able to join me in Fayetteville, Georgia. That's why I'm doing it, because I am extremely compassionate about doing this work. It is what I have spent my life, last 17 years of my life at least, preparing for and being ready for. So as we improve our personal awareness, again, I'm hoping that we avoid relationships ending up in the emergency room. And what I want people to understand is that there are relationship dynamics, there are relationship basics that if you learn empathy, if you learn communication skills, if you learn listening skills, that makes the relationship better. And that with those foundational things, you can probably then take any problem, any issue, any challenge that you might have to work on it and to get it and to do better with it. Personal awareness, relationship dynamics, and the various treatment options that are there. We all have friends and families that we talk to about our relationships, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you always want to make sure if you're communicating about your relationship and you're communicating it for it to become healthy, that you're measuring the health of it, because it doesn't do you any good. It doesn't do the person you're talking to any good. It doesn't do the person you're talking about any good. If, for instance, you're talking to someone about how your child is behaving and you're talking, and your child isn't getting any better because you're not talking to the right person or the right group or the right treatment options for that relationship to get better. Your goal should be health, and so that you don't end up in the emergency room or ICU, or that the death of a child relationally would be one that ends up, either on drugs or in prison. The death of a sibling relationship would be one where the siblings don't speak to each other for a period of time, or sometimes even for life. For husbands and wives, in which relationships ends up in divorces or unhealthy relationships, even though they're together, they're not happy. So we just want to get underneath that if we can, and start trying to avoid that. And so that's the goal of what I'm doing here and trying to do here, is to try to avoid some of that ICU. And every relationship is not going to be in perfect health every day. All of us have situations and times in which we kind of transgress, but not to the degree of ICU or emergency room or death. That is what I think we can absolutely avoid. So that's kind of the foundation and the 1, 2, 3 of relationships, those kind of base guiding principles for me. And again, I have dedicated a third of my life to doing this work in the education process that I've gone through, in the developing a practice, and just constant learning around how do we make relationships better, and employing those relationships dynamics in my practice, that training in my practice. And this, I think, is one of the things that I've often wanted to do, is to be able to train in groups and in a form where we add this to the mix. And so, again, I've said it a couple of times, I'm just extremely excited about this opportunity that in this journey that you're taking with me. This actually is the first of our ABCs of relationship. This is the first. And I can't tell you specifically why I started with the letter T. Obviously, it's not the first letter in the alphabet, but as I it just came off, and it was just so quickly, this is it. I'm gonna start with temptation, transparency, and trust. And as I thought about it, I think one of the reasons why is that a lot of people will deal with trust issues in their lives, either siblings, their moms, dad, kids, and breaches in trust. And people often want to know, how can I get it back? How can I trust him? How can I be trusted again? I'm working so hard to be trusted by my mom or my dad or my girlfriend or my boyfriend or my sister or brother or husband or wife. How do I get it back? And what I realize is you can't start there. The way that I laid this teaching out is temptation. Usually there's a temptation that came first. There was probably a lack of transparency that came after. And then there was a degradation in trust. So if you're going to restore the trust, I think you have to start at the beginning and not at the end. So that's what this video series is about. This is our kickoff session, session number 1. To start back, how do we get something that is so critical for relationships that all of us want, even if we're the person who has breached the trust, we actually really want to gain it back. And this, hopefully this series will give us some insight as to how we do that. All right. So what I've talked about earlier is that so many of us are just in the center of many different relationships. We have siblings, we have ex-spouses, we have engaged people or dating people that we have been in relationship. We have coworkers, in-laws, enemies, parents, friends, spouses. So it is, I don't think there's anybody on the planet. Obviously, if you're on the planet, you at least have a parenting relationship of some degree or a someone who's calling themselves your parent. So I don't think there's anybody on the planet that could have escaped or is absent of a relationship. So that's why this is so dynamic and so key to who you are, is to learn how to maneuver and to develop and to grow and enhance relationships that you're in. And again, there will be three subjects in this lesson. We'll talk about temptation first because I think it's the foundation of where it all starts. Then we'll talk about transparency, and then we'll move right into trust. All right. Temptation, in the way that I've laid this out, is temptation has five core pieces to it. And by definition, in order for something to be tempting, there's a couple of things that has to be there for in order for it to be a temptation. The desire, the definition of temptation as I've worded it here, is the desire to have or to do something you know you shouldn't have, or that you should avoid. And so temptation is that you have a desire, you know you should avoid it, and that those two pieces is what is defined as temptation. So as we look a little deeper into the desire and kind of trying to define it, is a desire is a strong feeling of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen. And the example I'll use is if I was on a diet, I have a desire for chocolate. I know I shouldn't have it because I'm on a diet. And the decision that I've made is what makes that a temptation. Prior to me going on the diet, chocolate wasn't a temptation because there's nothing that says I can't have it. But when you make a commitment to something that now it precludes something else, then that becomes a temptation. And the thing that I want people to really understand is just because you made the commitment to something doesn't mean the desire goes away. That desire for chocolate did not go away. So I would be kind of fooling myself to say that I'm going on a diet today and I no longer want chocolate. The desire for chocolate is gone. It is still there. That's why you have to be very careful as to what you give yourself over to, because later in life, when you make commitments that make that desire now a temptation, is you'll have to deal with that temptation and you'll have to manage it. So when you're dating, be very careful about what you do in your dating cycle. If you ever want to get married, because some of the things you desire to do in dating may not longer be able to be done when you're married. For instance, even for a child, be careful when you're a child doing things that may not longer be permissible when you're an adult. Because you would have desires for them if you want to just act, silly and drive a fast car and, do whatever, something silly. When you become a parent, you can no longer do that because of the parenting commitment that you've made, but that desire may not be gone. So that's just something you'll manage. And again, why you should avoid it is because of your prior commitments, your training, and your assumed compliance. A lot of times kids don't, commit to what their parents are training them to, but because of that parental dynamic relationship, it's an assumed compliance. And you sit there and you let your parent assume that you're going to do this because you don't, say up front, I'm not going to do that, mom, or I'm not going to do that, dad. So what makes temptation something you should avoid is because you have made a prior commitment to either get married, go on a diet, not tell secrets among siblings. Whatever that commitment is you made, then the temptation is something that you should avoid. It shouldn't be something that an external person has to say, you shouldn't have done that. Because a lot of times the commitment to do or not do something is a personal commitment that we've made. And again, that commitment doesn't make that desire go away. So as we kind of walk through this training, we're going to talk about how you manage the desire that is still there after the after the commitment has been made. So before I go much further, I want to talk about where do desires originate from? Where do they come from? So the first place, and I think the most intrinsic place that desires come from, is in your spirit. It's the higher inclination. It's like the manufacturer of you put certain desires in you, by the manufacturer. If I were a car manufacturer, there would be certain things I would put inside the car as a designer and a manufacturer because I want them there. So there were certain desires and inclinations that the creator wanted in us that he absolutely put up in us. So there are some of our desires that absolutely are born out of our spirit. We don't have anything to do with them. I tell people all the time that there's a G-shaped vacuum in your soul, and there are desires that come out of that, and there are certain desires that only he can fulfill, that nothing else can fulfill. We'll try to plug everything else in that G-shaped vacuum, but there are certain desires that the creator gave to us that only he can fulfill for us. It's like a high-priced car manufacturer. He wants you to bring that car back to them. They've made it so intricately, with such high mechanics that no one else can fix it. You have to bring it back to that detailer. And so, like with us, there are certain temptations and desires that we have that only God, the creator, can fix for us, and that he wants us to come back to him as a manufacturer. And there are desires in your soul. There are longings that you have within yourself. For instance, I couldn't tell you where the longing came for to be married and to have kids. It's just been in my soul since I've been aware that I had a soul. There were longings that I've had to be in corporate America. They've been there forever, to be a corporate executive, to be a corporate professional, to be a psychologist. Those longings have been in my soul forever. So they're longings that are actually yours, and they come from within you. But there are things specifically that you desire to do, desire to get married, desire to have kids, desire not to have kids, desire to be an astronaut, desire to be a pilot, desire to be a stay-at-home mom. So those are longings and desires that you have within your own soul. Another key area where desires come from is your five senses: what you see, taste, touch, feel, and hear. Temptations come from that area as well, and you have to be extremely careful, therefore, by what you see, taste, touch, hear, and feel, because it could create a desire that you really don't want. But because you have tasted it or touched it or seen it, that desire now is almost like controlling you. Probably one of the most notable notable ones is drugs. If you put drugs in your system, the desire for that comes from your body, but it's something that you may not want. And I hear people say all the time, God, take this desire away from me. I don't want it. I don't want it. But that's why you have to really guard what you see, taste, touch, feel, and hear, because once it's there, it actually can have a life of its own. Another key area where your desires come from is from your thinking. Sometimes you have to be very careful about what you meditate on or what you think about. You have to just kind of say, nope, I'm not thinking about that. If you're married, you just can't be thinking about, spending too much money, because if you think on it and meditate on it, again, that's another way you get wrapped up into a desire, doing something that you wish you shouldn't have done, buying those shoes, or going out late at night when you know you should be in the bed. If you think about it, it will become a desire. So you really have to guard your thoughts. The other place where desires come from is from your environment. You really have to be careful as to who you hang around, because even though I don't want it, I don't care for it, especially when you're teenagers and you're young, you have to be careful, because those people who do want it and do want to say it and do want to do it and do want to be it, if they're in your environment or if you're in theirs, then that actually could become a desire of yours when you normally would not have wanted it to be. But it actually did become a desire. So we've talked about desires, and remember, temptation is a desire that you know is wrong. So now we're going to kind of dig a little bit into, where does knowing come from? How do I know what I know? Where does my knowing come from? Again, the first and deepest level of your knowing is intrinsic. It's your perception. It's your knower. It's something in you. It's your intuition. It's your gut. It's the deepest part of you that you probably can't explain or don't understand. It's just something inside of you just knows. And in relationships, a lot of times we ignore that because there's something inside that relationship that we want. So we go inside it and to get it. But there's something in our knower that says, I don't think you want to go in that relationship to get that, even though I know it's something you want. If I were you, I wouldn't go in there. And your knower is telling you, and it's intrinsic, and that's why it's so hard to follow sometimes, because you can't put your finger on where is it coming from? How does it know what it know? I haven't seen that. I haven't heard that. Why are you telling me that? It's hard to follow, but just just wanted to cover it because it is something that where your knowing comes from. Another key area where your knowing comes from is what you see. Um, in the early developmental stages of a person, it's not what they're told. From about 0 to 4, 7 years old, the best ways you learn anything is what is modeled before you, what you see. Your biggest receptor is what you see and hear. It's not what you know, what you're told, what you're able to comprehend, because at that level, your mind is not able to comprehend even everything you see if it was told to you. You tell a 3-year-old something, they can't comprehend it because they don't have the faculties to comprehend it. So the very first kind of sensing place that you learn something is by what you see and what is modeled before you. A lot of times in relationships, the one that we see and that we know or that we learn from is our parents or our grandparents or aunts or uncles. So a lot of times what we know is simply about what is modeled before us. The other thing is about what you taught, what you actually hear with your ears, what someone is taking the time to not model for you, but time to tell you. That's why it is so very, very, very key as you're working with your adolescents and teenagers and training them is to talk to them, not so much as just model them. Statistically, they say that we spend anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes a day talking to our children, and that's just not good for their development. I thought I was a much better parent than that. And I said, oh no, when I heard the statistic, not me, I'm a much better parent than that. And I actually measured it. And I was probably some days less than 15 minutes a day talking to my child by saying, are you up? Are you ready to go to school? Okay, come on, let's go. Get them out of the house, put them on the bus. And that was it for the communication until 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And that probably didn't take 3 minutes. So what your children hear, what you hear, are absolutely instrumental in your development and how you are tempted by what you hear. So those three basics, what's intrinsic to you, what's modeled for you, and what is taught to you, then you get a chance to either accept it, believe it, reject it, learn it, experience it, or not. And so the rest of it is kind of yours in your domain, but what your intrinsic, what is modeled, what you hear is kind of outside your domain. And so what you know is a combination of all of that. It's just it's kind of a build upon of all of that. And some of the times you have to guard what you hear, you have to guard what you see. You have to kind of test out what you accept. You have to kind of weed out what you believe and kind of think about what you reject. It's just a learning, growing, development process as your knower gets stronger through these various dimensions. Knowing translates into feelings. If I know something, like I know Maurice should talk to me with, good English and no degrading words, and I know that, I know it in my knower. So if I experience that, my feelings are going to be negative because I know he shouldn't do that. I know he shouldn't talk to me that way, or I know I shouldn't talk to him that way. So based on what you know from your knowing experience will absolutely dictate how you feel. And that's another one of the areas within our relationships that people just don't take enough time to spend with is you will do something to someone or someone will do something to you and they are so callous with how that something made you feel. I think one of the best ways you can get to know the people that you're in relationship with is to tell them how you're feeling. You have a conversation. What do you think about what I just said? How you feeling about what I just said? Is it good, bad, or indifferent? I do it with my kids all the time. I absolutely do it with my clients. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're thinking based on what I just said or did. All right. So based on temptation, what you desire, and then what you know has a kind of integrated effect. The truth is on this side. What your knowledge is in the middle, and what you believe is on the other side. And this is constantly going in and out. You may um, uh, have knowledge of something, but you may not yet believe it because you don't know if it's the truth, and you may think of something as the truth, and because you don't have a knowledge of it, you don't believe it. So this is a constant going in and out, and that's why I absolutely believe why counseling is important and group dynamics are important, because it gets you a chance to kind of talk through, weed out, push out, pull up, pull in other perspectives about what you believe and what may be your truth, in a very conversational learning experience kind of way. When you don't have to deal with something while you're learning it, you can say what you want to say, or put anything out there on the table, but you need to know it when you have to deal with it. That's why I think it'll be so important for us as we go through this learning experiences, like it's your practice before the big game. Because when you're in the big game, you got to know it. You can't be out there fumbling the football when it's game day. You can do all of this in practice, and hopefully we'll get all of this down in conversations that we will have with each other over the next year or so. All right, so now just kind of doing a put it all back together when it comes to temptation is the journey towards temptation now becomes what I call behavior modifications. Is if you find yourself doing something that you know you shouldn't do, then we've got to modify that behavior to get away from that something that you're doing. So here's the kind of the psychological way that this flows. If we find ourselves doing something that we know we should avoid, then our next goal is don't get caught. And if I can't get caught, first, if I do something that I know I shouldn't do, our psychological human nature first response is don't get caught. And if I work on not getting caught, then the next thing is, if I do get caught, I work on not taking the blame. I say every other reason under the sun why I did what I did, because I knew I shouldn't have done it. So I work very hard psychologically, relationally, and not taking blame for it. But the beautiful thing about it is, if you just take the blame for it, if it's something you know, and sometimes your internal knower, the thing that I said that's inside of you, the internal knower knows that you were wrong. And if you can just take, I'll just say blame for a quick second, blame should shift very quickly into responsibility. Blame says I'm wrong. Responsibility just takes to say I did it. I'm not saying that it was good, bad, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just taking responsibility for it, because blame is hard to do. Blame is hard to do because it kind of has a negative connotation to it. You did something. I'm going to blame you. You shouldn't have never done that. As opposed to accountability that says, you know what? I own it. I did it, and I'm taking responsibility for it. So you can't blame me because I'm owning it and I'm taking accountability. So one of the, I'll call it a rescue ranger for the psychology is, if you can take responsibility for something, it really helps your psyche not have to fight off the blame for it. That's, of course, if you did it. Now, if there's a conversation that needs to be had that you didn't do it, hopefully when we talk about communication skills, you can get the other person to understand it's not something you should take blame or responsibility for, because you didn't do it or it didn't happen that way. All right, so now as we kind of wrap up temptation, one of the things I want all of us to understand is we are born an individual, we will die an individual. And almost everything you do is individual choice. But as we look at the relationships that we're in our lives and the significance of those relationships, we really should be making individual choices that encompasses the relationships. If we find ourselves making individual choices that are just about me, and I'm in relationships, that's why they sometimes become so antagonistic, because they're individual choices that didn't think anything about the relationship. Absolutely, I make a lot of individual relationships. Things are just good for me. But as I make those decisions, I have Maurice and my kids and the other significant relationships in my life in mind. So I don't make them solely selfishly. So again, you will always have individual choice. God gave us free will. That's why the Father above didn't take away our choice in our relationship with Him. He left us with individual choice because He didn't want to make it adversarial. He didn't want to make it antagonistic, that you can't do anything individual because you're so concerned about the negative impact on this relationship. You have your free will. You can do with it what He wants. But what He wants you to do is to take that free will and do everything you do with it in relationship, the fact that in the concept of relationship. And we can do that. It's not that hard, to be honest. I think it's a lot of work for some of us, but it's not that hard. And some of us get afraid of relational work. When we have to work at a relationship, we think relationships should be easy, and we think, it shouldn't be any work, where they're not. Parenting relationships are not easy. Sibling child relationships to relate to your parents is not easy. Sibling relationships are not always easy. In-laws are not always easy. Co-workers, and of course, enemy relationships are never easy. So don't be afraid of the work component of relationship development. Is whatever it takes to get the job done. If the relationship is significant enough, let's kind of move towards getting the work done, because that's what you do on your jobs every day. No matter how hard the task, no matter how many overtime hours you have to work, you're committed to it and you get the job done. So other thing I want to do here is with temptation is obviously it's going to turn into some work for some of us. But the thing I want us to do is to be committed to that work. All right. So as we kind of move out of the temptation realm and into the transparency realm, you can obviously imagine once we talked about temptation, if we don't always do the right thing, and we won't, none of us will, then why the next phase of this training is so important. Transparency is the currency of trust. You cannot get trust. You can't pay for trust without transparency. That is the currency you pay for trust with. If you want someone to trust you, you have to pay it with transparency currency. And just to kind of lay down a foundation for what transparency means, it implies openness, communication, and accountability. You can't be transparent if you're not open. You can't be transparent if you're not communicating. You can't be transparent if you're not taking accountability. One of the things that I use with just kind of as a knowing with my kids is if my kids are not, because we've always had open communication, all of my kids, we've always had open communication. And if they've ever retreated, if they're ever withdrawn and become less open, I can pretty much assume that there's something that they don't want to be transparent about. And again, that's not always bad. That's not always negative. I just know it's something that they don't want me to know, or that they're not being transparent with me about. And again, they're individuals. They have lives. They go through things and share things and experience things that I don't necessarily need to know. But that lack of openness and communication, and sometimes is a sign to say that, something is happening. And again, it may not even be your business what's happening, but sometimes it is. It's a retreat from transparency. And we know that to be true with our relationship with God is if we do something wrong, those are the times when we mostly retreat. We kind of stop talking to God. We just like, okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow. It's just a telltale sign of what the psyche does when something happens that probably needs a little bit more transparency. One of the key dynamics to transparency is about quantity. Do you share with frequency? Maurice and I talk obviously every day. And we share things every day. If I have some experiences, I share them every day with Maurice. There's a quantity of that goes along with transparency. How much time are you spending together? How much time are you spending together talking? In friendship relationships, sometimes if you've talked to somebody every day and they're not talking to you today, it could mean they are upset with you about something. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could be just that they're busy. But a lot of times when the quantity of communication changes, it often can mean something that there's not a lot of transparency there. Maybe there's a breach in that transparency. Again, nothing is absolute. So I don't want you to say because XYZ stopped talking to you that something's up, because that's not always true. but quantity is one of the dynamics that kind of goes into the transparency lineup. Perception is sharing with a level of understanding and clarity. Is if you ask your child where they're going, they just say out. That's not clarity. That's not detail. If you asked your wife where is she going and she says to the mall, just going out, that's not transparency. Transparency comes with a perception that I'm going to make sure you understand exactly where I'm going, what I'm going to do when I get there. We are clear on the perception. And I do that a lot with Maurice and probably overshare details with him is, 3 o'clock, I think I'm going to go over here, but I'm probably going to stay there at about 4 o'clock and then I'm going to go here. If I take a Friday off from work and he's at work, usually I'll tell him I'm going to my mom's house and I'm going to leave mom and go to, to the store, and then I'm going to leave the store and I think I might go by my sister's. That comes with perception. Do you have a very clear perception of what I'm talking about or what I'm going to do or where I've been? So transparency has a concept of perception, which means sharing a level of understanding and clarity. Quality of information, what is the relevant information that you're sharing? Is that some people, to kind of, I guess, fool someone, they will talk about a whole lot of stuff, but they won't talk about anything of quality. They won't share. A lot of times men will talk about this, but they won't talk about their feelings. A lot of times women will talk about a lot of feelings, but won't talk about a lot of impacts. I feel this way, but what impacted you? A lot of their history, maybe they don't talk about. Again, I'm just using men and women as example. It's not necessarily true on either side all the time. But what is the quality of information that you share, which means transparency? And this is a struggle in a lot of relationships. I think sometimes when you're dating, is that, how much do I share? Do I share too much? Do I share too little? I think your knower will tell you what you need to share. And when there's something that you probably should share that you're not sharing. The last component of transparency is intentionality, is sharing information proactively. One of the things Maurice and I work on a lot is, and I think it aligns with integrity, is sharing something before I ask you. Or my kids, if I, ask them something, why do I have to ask you that? Why didn't you just tell me? And there may be a reason why they didn't tell me. Maybe I'm not a good communicator. Maybe I'm not a good listener. But as they tell me that, one of the things I look for with my kids, and my youngest daughter, she's absolutely wonderful at this. She shares with intentionality. She shares proactively. She's very transparent. She's very open. And I think Maurice and I've just laid a platform for her for that. I think it's probably part of what she's gifted at and what she does well anyway. But the other thing is that I think she feels safe to do it. She doesn't feel judged. She doesn't feel criticized. She doesn't feel fussed at by being transparent. And that's another thing is, if you want transparency, you've got to make sure that the environment is there for it. If you want your kids to be transparent, if you want your spouse or dating partner to be transparent, sometimes the reason people aren't transparent is because the environment is not conducive for transparency. If I tell you this, I'm going to get in trouble. So that's why I withhold information from you, because I don't want to get in trouble. Not because I wouldn't have wanted to tell you myself. I probably would have wanted to tell you, but I knew how you were going to react. So part of what we do sometimes is to create the environment to make sure that the environment is conducive for transparency. Transparency translates into trust, but you can't get to trust without it. Trust is the foundation of a relationship. And just like the foundation of a house, if the foundation is solid and the house is sitting on it, you kind of never even think about the foundation. It's just there. But when there's a crack in the foundation, then everything in the house becomes, it becomes a critical situation. And that's just like it is with trust in a relationship. As long as trust is there, you don't kind of think about it. It's just part of what goes along with the relationship. It's just you brought it along with the relationship. But once trust is breached, you absolutely it's critical. It's the foundation, and nothing sits right in the house until you can regain some level of trust back to that crack in the trust that has happened in that foundation. And here's why we should be so focused on it with transparency and using transparency as a tool and a mechanism to get trust back. If we want to establish or increase or mend trust, we must begin with being transparent. And again, I'm going to talk about some more levels of transparency. It doesn't mean perfection. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to tell you every single thing about every little bitty, itty bitty thing. That's not what it means about being transparent. It's just the way you are and the way you think and the way you feel about this relationship, that it is worthy of transparency, which is it's the power. There's a whole lot of power. Sometimes people are trying to fix relationships, just working, and the only thing they need to work is transparency. They're working everything else except for transparency. And sometimes if they were simply to work transparency, the relationship would just kind of fix itself to some degree. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of circle back with transparency and just kind of pull it all together. Quantity is how much information you're sharing. Intentionality is how proactively you're sharing that information, is your intentions are to be transparent. The perception is, do I give you enough information to be very clear? Do you understand? Do you have the right perception of what's going on here? Do you not have the right perception of what's going on here? Have I not shared enough clarity and enough detail? And the last part is the quality of information I'm sharing. Is the information that I'm sharing with you meaningful? I'm trying to use a sibling relationship. If I've come from a fairly large family. There's 4 boys and 4 girls. And if I am trying to be transparent within that relationship, it takes a sense of me giving of myself to be transparent with my siblings. It takes a part of me taking in who they are to be transparent in that relationship, because transparency is not always about what you want. It's about what you want and what you know that other person needs from you. So it's about giving and taking to be transparent. There are some people who need a lot more transparency than others. There's some people who need a lot less transparency than others. So again, it's not just about what you need. It's about being in a relationship with people and giving them some of what they need as well in the relationship. I said it earlier, and I'll say it again, is that the whole focus for what we're talking about and working on here is about healthy relationships. Relationships with high transparency, sharing vital information intentionally in a systematic and a proactive way. If I think of us, me as a person or as an individual, one of the things that I think that if my relationships are sound, the whole circle that I showed you, if all of my relationships around me are sound and good, my kids, my friends, my parents, my in-laws, my coworkers, it makes for a better life for me. I have a better life. So part of what we're doing here is just kind of your own personal life investment so that you can have a more enriching and enhancing life. And I think that's what we all want to do. I don't think anyone wants to live on this earth being miserable. Before I go into trust, I'm going to talk about the doorway to trust. Honesty is that doorway. And I'm going to talk about honesty as if we don't really know what it is. Every action and every word that comes out of your mouth bears witness to what values you are loyal to. If you are loyal to honesty, honesty will come out of your mouth. If you're not loyal to honesty, honesty won't come out of your mouth. And I couldn't tell you where or how honesty became something that I'm extremely loyal to. I would assume that it came from my mom in some teaching she may have given me, or some early modeling somewhere along the way, but I just have never picked up lying. I've just not done it because I don't know if I always think of the consequences. I don't think if you think about all the stories or dishonest things you can do, as a record, you probably, just say if you got away with half of them you're going to have to fess up on anyway. And it's the fessing up part that usually destroys the relationship. It's not the honest part. We are wired for honesty. Our brains and psyche is wired for forgiveness. It's not wired for dishonesty. It's not wired for distrust. That's why when you have lied, that's what makes it so hard. It's not the thing that you have done that makes it hard. It's the dishonesty that makes it hard, because our brains are not wired for that. Emotionally, we're not wired for it. Psychologically, we're not wired for it. And when we have to deal with it, it makes our system kind of go into a kind of a tailspin, because we're not psychologically, biologically, mentally, or any otherwise wired for dishonesty. We're wired for honesty. So if you can get past the, not taking blame, and, if you can get past that and just go be honest, you have a better chance of making sure that the relationship stays intact than you do if you are dishonest. A couple of doorways into this honesty component is, honesty means that you're consistently loyal to truth. It has a component of being consistent, and that you're loyal to the truth and it's consistent. It doesn't mean if you're going to get in trouble, you don't consider if this is not going to work out for you or whatever. You are just loyal to the truth, and you are consistently loyal. It's what kind of takes you up on the honesty meter, being an honest person. The other component and doorway to honesty is faithfulness. Faithfulness is without question, no matter what, no matter how come, if, ands, or but, it doesn't matter the situation or the scenario, I'm going to stand truth to this loyalty. I was talking to one of my brothers one day, very honest person, just has a heart of gold. And I don't even know why I asked him this question, but I asked him if he found a wallet that belonged to someone else that had the identifying information in the wallet, and just say if it was somebody on his job, and he knew the person, didn't know the person personally, but he knew whose wallet it was, and it had a large sum of money in it, and nobody would ever know he found it. It was just something he found in a corner in the dark somewhere, and nobody saw him pick it up or whatever. No, it was him. Would he turn it in? And he smiled and he laughed, and he had to think for a minute, and he kind of chuckled. And I don't think he ever told me whether he would turn it in or not, and that's not what I'm using that example for, is that faithfulness to it would have been an absolute yes. No matter the situation, he could have been broke, he could have been needing his car note paid, he would have said yes. Faithfulness, absolutely, I would have turned it in. Consistency is about the frequency and your to truth. Faithfulness means under the most stressful circumstances, you're going to be honest. Another doorway into honesty is communication, your intentions and your motives. There are so many times in life that things don't turn out like they should. There was no malicious intent, and there were no malicious motives underneath it. However, the person never intended to hurt you. They never intend to frustrate you. They never intend to disappoint or destroy your feelings for them. That was not their intent. So many times when someone has not told the truth, one of the key things to kind of walk through with them is, what was your intentions? What was your motive? Because I absolutely got hurt. I absolutely was disappointed. So what was your intent and your motive? And having a strong set of communication skills to be able to communicate that through is extremely, extremely important. So honesty, in my opinion, has 3 doorways to it. You have to be consistent in loyalty to the truth. Truth just is very important to you. You have to be faithful to the truth under dire circumstances without question. And then you have to be able to communicate your intentions and your motives if by chance there is a fault in honesty. So loyalty to truth can be measured in your consistency. The more consistently loyal to truth you are, the more of an honest person you are. You cannot say that you're an honest person if you're not consistent. You're a dishonest person. So some people say, I am honest, I do tell the truth. Well, you use your own measuring stick and you tell yourself, you kind of go internal and you ask yourself in a week, in a month, in a day, how consistent have you been in being honest with your mom or your dad or your sister, your brother, your husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or coworker, for instance, or friend? How consistently have you been honest and open and forthright with that person? Then you can measure your level of honesty and consistency. Consistently loyal doesn't, however, mean perfect. There is no such thing as perfection when it comes to human beings. So we're not asking for you to be perfect, never without fault. That's why I talked about earlier communicating your intents and your motives, because you're not always going to be perfect and not perfectly loyal. That's because honesty isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. So if a person breaches just one time and they ask for your forgiveness, if you know they are consistent to the truth, they are 99.9% on, and this is the 1% of the time that they're off, that's what you want to measure. If your child tells you the truth most of the time and they've got consistent, they've been pretty, you're like, she never tells me a story, or he never tells that, but this time he did. I wonder what's wrong. And that's when your, kind of intuition should go off and say, what was wrong? Because they don't typically tell stories. They don't My husband has never looked at a girl, or my wife has never lied to me about the finances. I wonder why she did it this time, or I wonder why he did it that time. So that's what you want to do, is be more curious about the imperfections than you are trying to have someone to be perfect. Inconsistency suggests a willingness to abandon the truth because it might help you gain a benefit or avoid negative consequences. If you become inconsistent in your honesty, typically the reason people do this, and I think most of us know this, is that they're trying to avoid getting in trouble, or they're trying to gain a benefit that wouldn't necessarily be there if they were honest. So what you have to be very careful about is measuring those inconsistencies. And again, that's why sometimes counsel comes in place. That's why group conversations come in place to be important, because you really want to look at what are those inconsistencies around. They tell me the truth about everything. With Maurice and I, Maurice never told stories about anything other than money. If it came to him overspending his allowance, because that's one of the things we did when we were married, and we still do it today, is we both had a kind of a free will spending allowance. And if he overspent his allowance, that was the only area where Maurice was inconsistent in telling me the truth. Pretty much everywhere else he told the truth and didn't kind of tell stories about anything else except for when it came to that and around finances. So you kind of want to also look at, is there an area that the person is inconsistent in, or that you are inconsistent in? You are honest about everything except for this one thing, then maybe you just need to have to get help around that one particular area in your life. The more inconsistent you are in your loyalty to the truth, the more, if this is loyalty, the more times you move away from loyalty, then you have to say, I am dishonest. Because you can't keep moving away from honesty, consistently and still say you're honest, because you're not. You're moving away from it, and then you're dishonest. And nothing is absolute. No one is absolutely always honest, and no one is absolutely always dishonest. So, but you just want to know for yourself, so that somebody doesn't have to argue. Oh, you're dishonest. You're dishonest. You do their own measuring stick. How consistent are you with making sure that you're loyal to honesty? And if you're loyal to honesty, then you're not a dishonest person. You may have had a dishonest situation, but you're not a dishonest person, and no one should be able to characterize you as being dishonest. Loyalty to truth can be measured in your consistency. This is more about the person who has the trust has been breached. If trust has been breached with you by your child, or by someone you're dating, or by a friend, or your sister or brother, you have to first be willing to forgive them and trust them again. No matter how loyal they are to truth, they will never be able to get back in a trusting relationship with you unless you're willing to allow them to do that. The other thing that is fairly psychologically difficult is for people not to, even they say I'm willing, they always want to go back to the past. Trust is about rebuilding, or mending trust is about the future. It is looking forward, it is going forward, it is about the future. It is not about looking back, or the past, or whatever there. That is not what trust is about. Trust is about, has a futuristic component to it. It's about looking forward and not about looking back. Now, you may have to do something with the back data to work on it when it comes to healing your relationship, but that's not where you go to get trust. You may have to do some healing back here, but it's not where you go to try to know if you're trusting the person or if you're trying to rebuild trust. You don't go back and get that data for that reason. Consequences, the consequence of trusting someone is just kind of leaning really into the uncertainty. A lot of people are not okay with uncertainty. They want a guarantee. That's just kind of how they are. They don't take risks. They don't invest in the stock market. They are risk averse as a person. So one of the things that make it very difficult for some people to trust again is the fact that it is uncertainty. You're not going to get 100% guarantee that your child is not going to, leave out in the middle of the night, or that your sister is not going to tell the secret that you told her not to tell. You're not, but you've got to be able to lean in and risk that uncertainty in order for you to get to where you need to get. And if you want to kind of repair or mend your relationship, you've got to lean into the risk. And some people are risk averse. And again, that's where the group counseling and where the individual personal counseling comes, because it's no longer an issue for whether this person is trustworthy. Is I'm not capable of trust. I'm not willing to take another risk. I'm not willing to be vulnerable. I'm not willing to walk right into the pain that you may cause me. Psychologically, we're pretty much pain averse. We want to avoid pain at all costs if we can. But being in relationships, you can't. The only way you can avoid pain in relationships is that you're not vulnerable. And without vulnerability, there is no connection. And without no connection, there is no intimacy. And if you can't trust your child, you can't be intimate with them. You can't be connecting with them. It's like you're wondering why you don't have a close relationship with your child sometimes. And it's because you don't trust them. And without trust, there is no vulnerability. And without vulnerability, there's no connection. Without connection, there's no intimacy. So then the thing we want to talk about, because this is all the stuff that happens in the psyche once trust is broken, is I want to control. I don't want to trust. I want to control. I want to manage. I want to handle. And trust and control are actually adversarial. They don't go together. They don't mix. You can't put the two in the same pot. If you are controlling something, you're controlling it. If you're trusting it, you're trusting it. You can't trust and control. It's almost like you trust with risk and consequences and vulnerability, and you control and you don't risk. You're not vulnerable, and you don't want pain. All the controlling is a no. All the trusting is a yes. Yes, I'm willing to risk. Yes, I'm willing to be vulnerable. Yes, I'm willing to be hurt. Control says, nope, I'm not willing to be hurt. Nope, I'm not willing to be vulnerable. No, I'm not willing to be to get hurt again. So that's why they're adversarial. One is a yes column and one is a no column. And if you ever want true joy in your relationship, you have to be willing to kind of walk into it. And again, I don't say run, because some people are not quite trustworthy just yet. And some kids need developing, and some siblings are just not on the right page. So I don't just say run into this, but I do begin to walk into it, because if you ever want to have the true joy of what that relationship could offer you, the process is to kind of lean into the consequences of uncertainty, the risk and the vulnerability and the possibility of pain. And that's the price you pay for true joy. And there's no way that I want to be married to Maurice any number of years and not have every one of them to be more joyous than the next. That's why I am absolutely willing to lean in, get therapy, do what I need to do to kind of make sure that our relationship continues to progress in a healthy way. Where there is a will, and so this is going to talk about a little bit about actually what trust requires. And you can't expect to get what you're not willing to give, because as sure as you are waking up every morning, you are going to need someone to trust you as well as you want to trust someone else. So in order to do this, be vulnerable to others because you want people to be vulnerable to you. Think well of others because you want people to think well of you. Anytime I've worked on something with Maurice, I always thought the best of him. I never thought he didn't want to do it or couldn't do it or just hated me so much he wasn't going to do it. I always thought the best of him. And if it wasn't in the fact of what he was doing, it was in my faith of what he could possibly be. Maybe people aren't where they should be when you have to start walking this out. But what you should have for them is a faith that they can get there, a faith in their humanity, a faith in their childhood development, a faith in their, reconciliation or their repentance. Having faith in that should at least give you enough to kind of stand on if you don't, in fact, because again, I am not by any stretch of the imagination thinking that everybody is going to be, they breach trust, you can give it back to them. But sometimes you have to stand on faith when you can't stand on fact. The other thing is you want to allow others to vent via empathy, empathic listening. If you have done something to someone, disappointed your mom, disappointed your sister, disappointed your spouse or your loved one or your in-laws, you want to be able to sit in that space and listen. I heard this saying one time that says, if I've had to experience it, the least you can do is to listen to that experience. So some people say, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear about your pain, I don't want to hear about it, it's always done what I don't want to hear it. And again, if I've had to experience that pain or that disloyalty or that distrust as a parent or a sibling, if I've had to experience it, I think the least you could do is to listen to me as I express what I experienced. And I think that's just healthy for the relationship. If I've experienced it, I think you could sit at the table with me and just listen to me as I tell you about what I experienced and not wanting to hear it, run away from it. And actually, I believe one of the most healthiest things in relationship reconciliation is to actually sit and listen and experience what you have caused someone else. If I'm disappointed in you as my child, if I am upset with you as my in-law, I think if the relationship is worthy to you or of anything of value to you, I think you could possibly sit and listen to me in my pain as I tell you about it. And it's not to blame you. It's not to get on to you in that moment. It's just to let you know what I have experienced as a person as a result of something you may have done or said. So that's something I think is critical for if you expect to ever receive it, you've got to be willing to give it. And if you can find somewhere in your soul to be optimistic that they are trying, and I know it's capable in most human beings to be optimistic because we have it for ourselves. If we ever mess up, if we ever do anything wrong, we're pretty confident that we're going to get it right. I'm going to do better. I'm going to do better. So I know optimism is in us, but a lot of times it's reserved just for me, or maybe for my kids, or maybe for my parents, or maybe for my friends, and I don't want to give it to you. I'm not giving you that optimism. It's only reserved for a few people, and I choose who I give it to. And again, I say, when you give it to the people that you give it to, you have to realize that it's a gift. It's optimism. They haven't earned it yet. You don't know necessarily what they're going to do yet, but you're willing to give them that optimism and that belief that they're going to be okay. So I just say have that in what you're willing to give to others. And there was always a hope for Maurice that if he ever messed up on something, I was in his corner cheerleading, babe, you're going to get it right this time. You're going to stay inside your budget. You're going to get it. You're not going to go over your budget. I was kind of his biggest cheerleader. And that's important. I think it's very important if you breach with your mother-in-law, that she believes that you believe that she's going to get it right. um, if your a fiance has done that you are hoping for them. Because if you're not hoping for me, if you're not believing in me, if you don't want me to get this right, if you're not cheering for me, and again, just kind of, got your, oh, you're going to get this right. I question sometimes, what does that mean for us? Is the relationship over between us? And for Maurice and I, it was never over, because I always went back every single time, and I'm sure he has done for me as well, hoping that I would get it right. If he were wanting to be intimate with me and I said, no, I don't want to do that, I think the next time he was saying, Monica's going to say yes. I just know she's going to say yes. He wasn't ever, she's not going to get it right. She's just going to, leave me out here on this island. She's never going to get it right. I think the thing that Maurice and I have done for each other so very well through the 22 years we've been married is we've been always been each other's cheerleader if we ever messed up. So I think that's something that we should give, because I think that's something we want if the shoe is ever on the other foot. And here's something that was so critical as over the years that I've done counseling, is there was a dawning, and it was an aha moment for me when I kind of got to this place of years of research and working with couples and families and stuff like that. The dawn is in what you believe. It is not what you necessarily know, because you don't know for sure a whole lot of things, but you believe a lot of things. And we live a large portion of our lives on what we believe, not on what we necessarily know. But there's sometimes with certain people, now if I don't know it, I can't live in that believing. I can't live in that nebulous space with you anymore. And the dawn is in what you really believe is to it begins to say, it kind of comes back to the trustee, the trustor, not the trustee, is, can I believe? Once something is breached or broken, or once you've lied to me, or there's been an untruth, can I believe? Do I have the capability in me to believe again? Or was it destroyed by that breach? And again, I think one of the healthiest things we can do for ourselves is to keep our belief system active. I don't think I want anything that anybody could ever do or say to me to take my ability to believe away from me. And obviously even to believe in them. So just as a definition, believe is to credit upon the authority or the testimony of another. When you give me your testimony, I'm going to credit that. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take that to the bank, and I'm going to say, I believe it because you've given me your word. And I think sometimes in conversation, if we impress upon a person, I really believe that. I believe you. It would make them somehow more accountable for what they say out of their mouths, as opposed to, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. I believe you. When you tell me this, I'm really believing that you're going to do this, and I do. And I think sometimes it psychologically messes a person up when they tell you something and they know that you don't believe them. It kind of puts them in a kind of a discontented place. And to believe means to be persuaded to the truth of something upon the declaration of another. When I declare it, you believe it. When I say it's so, it's so. And that sounds difficult if someone has breached your trust. Why would you believe in them again if just today or yesterday you know for a fact that they weren't being truthful? What I say to that is, I tell people, when you have been the breacher of that trust, do not commit too early. Don't say what you're going to do. Don't say how you're going to behave. Sometimes you might need to go to therapy to figure out how you're going to behave or what you're going to do. You may be dealing with an absolutely phenomenal desire that even though you don't want to eat that chocolate cake, you keep finding yourself eating it. So don't make any commitments until you get underneath that desire, figure out what's going on, find out what's wrong, and try to fix it before you make any commitments. Sometimes we want to, rush trust, and trust can't be rushed sometimes. Most of the time, trust can't be rushed. Sometimes it can be about God sitting in the seat, holding that seat for that person while they go get something fixed. And me and God is going to hold this seat in my heart for you until you go and figure this out. Maybe the desire is too strong. Maybe how you've been disloyal to honesty so long that it's just who you are. And I'm going to let God hold this seat for you until you get back, until you're able to come back and make some commitments to me, because I don't want to believe in you and you don't want me to make any commitments to me until we both know that we can do this thing together and to do it right, that you are trustable and that I can trust you. So there are times when I may ask Maurice to let God hold a seat for me. And there may be times I'll let God hold a seat for him that I cannot believe. And it's just about, I'm going to hold on to my faith that you were endowed by a creator, that you have this capability. And that's all I can do right now. All right. One issue is with the truster, and we kind of went over these, but I'm going to kind of recap these, is once the trust is broken, you want to do everything you can to reduce the risk of failure. So that's why we get in control mode, because we want to do everything that we possibly can to reduce the risk of failure. And so therefore we go into imposing certain constraints. And again, you've got to understand that if it's control, it's not trust. And if a child has breached your trust, you don't want to go into control mode, because I shouldn't say you don't want to go into control mode, because sometimes you may have to put the bumpers out there so that they don't hurt themselves. You got to kind of analyze what they're able to have freedom and liberty to do. And if they've done something that showed that they didn't need the bumpers out that far, you kind of may have to bring the bumpers in just to guard them, because they're not capable of doing what they think they want to do. They cannot do what they just can't. They're not capable of doing it, especially with adolescents. If you monitor, it can sometimes show the lack of trust. And I'll give you an example of something Sam Walton used to do when people would come into his store and present him with products and stuff like that, and it's going to sell this much. What he would ask them for is, do you believe in these numbers? These numbers that you're showing me, these financial statements that you've given me, do you believe in these numbers? And they said, oh yeah, we believe in the numbers. I think you're going to have this lack of return. Sam Walton would agree, shake their hand and say, okay, if you believe them, I believe them. But he would also monitor what he believed. And there's a different dynamic that you have to be very cautious about, believing and monitoring versus not believing and monitoring. And here's how it'll play out very differently. If you believe that the person is going to do it, if I believe that Maurice is going to, stay in his budget, when I monitor the checking account and he didn't stay in his budget, my temperament is so much more, babe, why you didn't stay in your budget? Really? You had to get what? Okay. So my temperament, because I believed, is much different with the breach than if I didn't believe. If I didn't believe he was going to do it anyway, you done said this 100 times, when I find you doing it, I'm going in, and I'm going in hard. I'm angry, upset, hostile. So a lot of times the psychology of believing and verifying is to your benefit, as opposed to not believing and verifying. It's okay to validate. Sam Walton did it, and I don't think anything's wrong with when you believe someone to validate what they said they were going to do. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there is something, could be something dynamically wrong in the relationship if you don't believe it and you verify. And that's the difference, kind of a psychological difference in believing and verifying and not believing and verifying. The goal is to be content with them having some discretionary of freedom. Again, it's risky, it's vulnerability, but you want to give them some discretionary of freedom, because otherwise you're going in it with zero trust. And if we're going to go in it with zero trust, we're probably not going to make much progress. Again, this is just to kind of put all of this together. The issue sometimes ends up being with the trustor. If the trustee has breached the trust, it brings up everything in the trustee, that I'm really not a vulnerable person, that I really am a suspicious person, that I am really distrusting more than I am trusting. I have therapeutic trust, but it's only reserved for my mom and dad and my kids. And I'm not a very optimistic person. I'm pessimistic. So a lot of times the shift turns from the person who actually did the breach to the person who's been breached, because it unearths everything inside of me that I never had to deal with until you did X. If you had never done X, then I would have never had to deal with all these things going on inside of me. So at that point, counseling can become a dual kind of a multi-therapeutic process with the family. You remember when I said earlier, there could be multiple therapeutic processes going on in the family at the same time. And this would be an example of that, is that if the child did something, or the spouse did something, or the mother-in-law did something, or the friend did something, then now I've got to deal with the fact that I don't trust people anyway. People will hurt you. People are no good. That, you know, all women will steal your bank account. All men are no good. So if I'm suspicious of that, if that's my pathological thinking, then I'm going to come out with that. Now we've got a kind of a multifaceted situation to deal with, as opposed to just one single thing. Healthy relationships involve both people in the relationship doing the work. There is no child, no mother-in-law, no co-worker, no sibling, no anything where trust can be rebuilt by one person. It's just not possible. Healthy relationships involve both people. Sometimes when you're trying to build a relationship and one person has to do all the work, ultimately that relationship is not going to be as healthy as it can be if one person who's breached is doing all the work, doing all the work, doing all the work. The relationship will be a little lopsided, because no one likes to doing all the work. Even if they did all the breaking, they don't like to doing all the making. And sometimes we want to hold that as the penalty, as the price you pay for breaking, because if you didn't break it, it wouldn't have been broken. So you could do all the work. I'm not doing anything. You do all the work. And again, that is possible, but it's not healthy. And what we're trying to do here is focus on building healthy relationships, not just existing relationships. Healthy relationships involve both people, again, like I said, and one thing you want to do is to build confidence, a reliance on resting on the mind of integrity, veracity, justice, friendship, or other sound principles for another person. And sometimes you have to employ a lot of these things. That you were my friend at one point. I did like you at one point. You did believe in justice at one point. I remember when you went to that rally, and truth and honesty and integrity was so important to you. So sometimes you have to go inside a person deeply enough to know that you've got something worth working with. And I think we all do. I think most of us have something worthy of working with, but we've got to have the confidence that it's there to go in there to even try. And I'm not trying to make light of this teaching. I'm not trying to push anybody towards a sense of, complacency or ease, because it's not. I've said a couple of times that relationships are tough work. But I think the value that they bring over time for our lives, for our marriages and our families and our society, I think is worth the work. Again, like I said, when we go on our jobs, we're willing to work whatever overtime schedules they give us, whatever weekends, nights, to do whatever it takes to make sure that we continue to work on that job. So I think part of what I'm saying here is that that same kind of work effort and work ethic probably needs to be employed in relationships at times. And again, you don't have to work at relationships all the time, but there are times when we do. And I think if we commit to those times when we have to work overtime and double time, I think it'll make our relationships a lot healthier. I said this earlier, and I've got a specific slide that addresses it, is don't rush back into trust too quickly. Let the journey begin with what you believe. In this diagram here, there are 3 people standing on the side of what I believe and only one person standing on the side of trust. And I'm reaching over there and I'm trying to get trust, but I just can't make it just yet. And so you've got to get stronger yourself. The relationship has to get stronger. The 2 people have to get stronger. And then once that strength is there, you can absolutely pull trust back over into the relationship. But I wouldn't say rush into it too quickly, because a second hurt sometimes is worse than a first hurt, because you've already got the soft spot of that first injury. So I absolutely encourage people to take it slow with your kids, your in-laws, spouses, anybody you're dating, co-workers, because you want to be healthy. You don't want to rush back into trust and you get injured more severely than you did the first time, because emotional pain is real. It can actually transition into physical pain, something that you have to actually feel physically in your body. So I wouldn't say rush back into it too easy. I wanted to just kind of spend a couple of minutes making sure that was clear. All right, that kind of wraps it up for the lesson, the teaching components of what I wanted to teach. Now I'm going to go into just a quick scenario of uh, transparency, temptation, transparency, and trust that happen in our lives, so you can just kind of get a glimpse of the value of how it unfolded. That's a picture of my husband. Maurice and I have been married 22 years. Maurice and I met, we dated long distance for about 2 years, 18 months, 2 years before we got married. So I lived in Atlanta. Maurice actually lived in Houston when we got married, and he moved here to Atlanta to be with me. And about maybe 8 or 9, 10 months into our marriage, I was a trainer. I was a trainer for the corporation that I worked for. And there was a training class that was going on one day. And inside, the people in the class came from out of town because we were a over the city corporation. So the people would come in from the various locations into our Atlanta office to train. And I was training in the office that day, and there was a group of people in the class, and there was one particular guy in the class, very handsome guy, very intelligent guy in the class, asking questions, learning about this, and he was very inquisitive, so he asked a lot of questions. So he and I had a chemistry, kind of a connection, and I knew it wasn't an intimate connection because I was madly in love with Maurice. This guy was nice looking, but he wasn't better looking than Maurice. So I knew there was something there. I knew there was a chemistry and a connection there, but it wasn't intimate. It wasn't an intimate feeling, but it was there, and I knew it. So when the class was over that day, he asked me, "Do you want to go to lunch tomorrow?" And I said, "Yeah, we'll go to lunch tomorrow." And you remember when I said that internal knower, that you just have that knower inside of you? Well, that knower was talking to me on the way home and says, "I don't think you want to do that." And I'm thinking, I couldn't figure it out because my head started saying, I'm not attracted to him. I'm very much in love with Maurice. Maurice and our marriage is great. I really don't know why the knower would tell me no, or why this internal checker is checking me. So I knew something was going on, though. When I got home to Maurice that evening, I asked Maurice, I said, "Babe," I said, "have you ever been attracted to anyone else since we've been married?" Because I didn't know once you got married, all your attraction meters go off and you don't have them anymore for anybody else. I didn't know. I had never been married before, so I wasn't really sure how this was supposed to work. But I was transparent enough and felt a little bit of temptation of something. I didn't know what the temptation was towards, but I knew because I was married, that desire to go to lunch with him was probably something I shouldn't do. The desire was there. I did want to go to lunch with him, but because of the commitment and the husband that I had, I probably knew I shouldn't have gone. So we moved to transparency when I got home, and I was telling Maurice about it. And I asked Maurice, had he ever been been attracted to anyone else since we got married? And he said, "No. Why do you ask?" So I told him about the guy in class. I told him about the attraction. I told him, about the chemistry. I told him he was nice looking. I told him he was intellectual. I told him all of that. And I said, "Babe, I don't know what it is, but I definitely know I was attracted to him. And do we work out of trust? I mean, temptation and attraction 6 years into marriage, 2 years into marriage? Does it supposed to happen the day you say I do? Does it go away?" I really didn't know. As you can imagine, though, Maurice being an African-American red-blooded man, he didn't like that so much. And he said, "What do you mean?" And I simply, again, just told him, this is what it is. I told him every bit of the transparency and truth that I knew that I had experienced and to the knowledge that I had. So, prior to Maurice kind of getting upset or angry or anything, he said his internal checker checked him. And he said the checker told him, if she was going to do something, she probably wouldn't be telling you. Her honesty should tell you something. And she's being very transparent. I don't know what to tell you, but I can tell you, you can probably trust her. So Maurice came back to me, and he was kind of struggling because, his wife is telling him she's attracted to some guy in class, and the internal checker is saying, don't get upset, whatever. And so what that we learned from that throughout the next couple of days was trust is not forged on temptation. Trust is forged, is kind of given up at the lack of transparency or an actual breach of that trust. The temptation wasn't the issue. I came home and I told him about the temptation. Maurice said that allowed him to trust me even more because of that transparency, and because obviously I didn't go to lunch with the guy, and so he was able to trust me even the more. And I will tell you that meant a lot to me, because if he had not trusted me, if he just said, I don't know what you're doing, who you think, I would have just like, what? I'm trying to be honest. I'm trying to be transparent. So his trusting in me was spot on. It was right. It was the thing to do. And it's just an example in our personal lives how there was temptation, desire, and something you shouldn't do. I took it home to be quite transparent. And Maurice, as a result of that, was automatically trusting. I won't say automatic because it took him a minute to get there, but he knew who does that, who comes home and tells their husband they're attracted to someone else. And later on, probably 6 months later, I found out what the attraction was. It had nothing to do with intimacy. It had nothing to do with me liking him. I am attracted to intellectual capital. I don't care if a 90-year-old man has it. I don't care if a 65-year-old woman has it. I don't care who it is. I'm attracted to intellectual capital, mental mind space, think, talk, and do. And that's what this young man had. He had intellectual capital that was the attraction. So it was a great learning experience for us. And so what we want to do is during the online session where you guys will get to call in, what I want to be able to do is to let you talk about any scenarios, any of this training and teaching that you'd like to call in, talk about, ask questions about, be transparent about. We will talk about it in those sessions. So let me just kind of go into now to show you how those sessions will work. There will be group sessions, and you can join those sessions in one of two formats. You can go online via WebEx, and there's a $25 cost to be in the session, which will be video sharing. You'll actually download an application. You can have it on your iPhone, your iPad, or your laptop, or your computer, and you download WebEx, free application. You will actually go online to our website to register, pay your $25, and on the day of that session, you will actually have your invite for the session. You'll be able to log in that way. And again, while you're in the session, you can share your video or not share your video. You will absolutely see our video live here. That's one way you can do it live at WebEx. The other way you can do it is if you're local here in Atlanta, you can come to our Fayetteville office. And that registration fee is $35 because we'll share some refreshments for breakfast. And what it will look like is there will be an audience of us in the room sitting here, and you will be actually on the video conference looking at us in the video, and we can see you and you can see us. The live people will be able to see you if you share your video. If you don't, you don't have to. And then you will be able to see us for sure as we talk about it, those dynamics. The capabilities during those sessions is you will be able to ask questions live. You'll send your questions. You can send your questions in via chat if you don't want to ask them. There'll be a chat board in the WebEx. You can chat it and send it in, and I'll get it that way. Once you register, there's a form on area on the format that says ask your question there. If you want it to kind of be pre-submitted, you can pre-submit your question there. And the way that you register, there's a registration page on our website, letstalkaboutit.net. There's a register for a group session. There you go and you fill out the form, you send it in, we get it. You pay your fee at that time. We get your registration. We send you back the WebEx invitation for the date and the time of the session. If you're not that website savvy, feel free to call us at 678-554-5982. Or you can email me directly at drhill@letstalkaboutit.net. Put in the subject line registration request so that I'll know it's, you're sending in a note to register. And for the most part, these sessions will be family friendly. We'll get conversation, I guess, up and down the board across all relationships and dynamics. But for the most part, they will be family friendly. So if you want to let your teenagers listen in or join in or come and join us, feel free to do that. The date of our first session will be Saturday, December 9th. The time frame will be 2 hours, and I said it for 2 hours mainly because people can drop in, drop out. They can stay for the whole 2 hours if they like. It's on a Saturday morning. Hopefully 9 o'clock is time enough to get up and get to where we are. The time frame will be set from 9 a.m. till 11 a.m. And again, you feel free to, if you're WebExing, you'll get the invitation for the start of the session and you'll have it to the end of the session. If you're local, you're feel free to, you know, stay for the whole 2 hours or come in and leave as you please. To hopefully we'll keep it not very destructive for the folks that are live. And I'm hoping that these sessions will be great. I've done these sessions before. We've had a ball. We laughed. We had a good time. It's just one of the most collaborative thing. And I think I'm so excited again about that. It's about relationships, and it's about helping us build healthy relationships. As I wrap up, this is the last slide. I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to play a little bit of music in the background here with this video, because I wanted to actually kind of take a minute to kind of wind down just a little bit before I end the session. This is a culmination for me of many, many years of educating and training and learning and preparing. I've been in practice in Fayetteville for 17 years, but this launch for the online community is something that I've longed to do. Why I am so focused on my relationship, Maurice, my husband Maurice, my daughter Ashley, my daughter Sharice, and my daughter Alyssa are my whys. I think it is absolutely necessary for me to become the best person that I can be, so that as I relate to each of those individuals, they get the best of me and they get the best of their lives. I don't want to be a destructive part of any one of their lives. I only want to be a positive influence in their lives. And I think the work that I have done for myself personally to make sure that as I interact and I engage with them relationally is a benefit. It's a benefit for me. It's a benefit for them. And I think I am the better for it, and I think they are the better for it. I am actually going to turn this up a little bit because it is not as loud as I would like for it to be. So excuse me for just a moment while I turn this volume up on this video. As we move through the next phase of this launch and kind of making sure we stay connected with you, I want you to understand that you can contact us on Twitter at Dr. Hill Let's Talk. We have a Facebook page at Let's Talk About It with Dr. Hill. I have an Instagram at Hill and Associates. And of course, the phone number there is 678-554-5982 is how you can stay in touch with us via phone if you need to. As I sit and think about this journey, where we're going, hopefully as a community, as a Let's Talk About It, what I call the Let's Talk About It Nation, making our relationships healthy, making us better as individuals, I'm hoping that we begin to transfer and transition other people into what we're doing. This is the work that I've done all my life with my family, with my immediate family, is trying to be the best me, so that as they experience me, they become the best them. So what I want to do is just take a brief moment to be in silence for a moment, just so all of us can take in, hopefully, what is about to happen with us and our relationships, and where we could possibly go. So just a moment of brief silence. Again, thank you so very much for joining with me on this journey. I don't know what I could have done. I don't know if I could have done it without you. Um, I appreciate you. I appreciate you joining in and listening in. And do me the favor, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, because that's the way that you will always know when I posted another video. The goal is to have one of these videos out each month. This video is coming at the very end of November. The talk session will be December 9th. We won't do any more sessions this year. We will actually do all of our other sessions next year in 2018. The goal is to do one session a month and one group talk a month. And to that end, I will hopefully see you on a YouTube group discussion here pretty soon. Thank you. And again, I appreciate you so much for joining. And here is to the best to us in all of our relationships.